One of the most important historians of the early Middle Ages thought violence was good as long as it served God. Gregory of Tours watched Frankish kings murder, scheme, and terrorize, and he approved, but only sometimes. The difference between acceptable and unacceptable violence reveals how medieval people understood power, faith, and what kept their world from falling apart. Gregory of Tours was a 6th century bishop whose work called the Histories is our primary window into Merovingian Gaul, the Frankish kingdom that emerged after Rome's fall in what's now France. Gregory wasn't just recording events, he was interpreting them through a theological lens. His fundamental outlook was pessimism, history was decline. 3 generations earlier, Clovis had united the Franks and converted to Christianity. He was the model king. But each generation after him grew worse. By Gregory's own time, he watched Clovis's grandsons with horror. Gregory's famous observation captures his despair. One is still amazed and astonished at the disasters which befell these people. But here's what's crucial. Gregory didn't blame violence itself for this decline. Violence was inevitable. Human nature is fallen. Sin corrupts every generation. The question wasn't whether rulers would use violence, they would. The question was whether that violence served God's purposes or merely human greed and pride. This distinction shaped everything Gregory wrote about kings, bishops, and the fate of civilization. To understand Gregory's worldview, consider what he believed held society together, not law, not the state, not economic prosperity, the church. Bishops and saints provided the supernatural foundation that prevented chaos. Kings existed to support this foundation, to terrorize wrongdoers and provide immediate earthly consequences that backed up divine judgment. A king who respected bishops and supported churches strengthened the entire social order. A king who challenged the church undermined the only force keeping civilization from collapse. The king's legitimacy flowed from the center outward, from the sacred to the secular. What made a ruler good in Gregory's eyes? Consider his portrait of Theudebert, Clovis's grandson, and Gregory's model of proper kingship. Gregory praised Theudebert for ruling justly, respecting bishops, being liberal to churches, and relieving the wants of the poor. Notice what's present: piety, charity, deference to ecclesiastical authority. Now notice what's completely absent. Gregory never mentions peace, never mentions military restraint, never suggests a good king avoids violence. Theodebert's goodness had nothing to do with being peaceful, and everything to do with directing his power toward godly ends. This framework explains Gregory's judgments throughout his histories. When a king killed to defend the church or punish heresy, Gregory approved. When a king killed for personal gain or wounded pride, Gregory condemned him. The violence itself was morally neutral, a tool that could serve God or Satan depending on its purpose. Modern readers often miss this distinction. We assume medieval people were simply violent and uncivilized. Gregory shows us something more complex, a sophisticated theological framework where violence wasn't the problem, misdirected violence was the problem, violence without divine sanction was the problem. Gregory's most dramatic confrontation came with King Chilperic, one of Clovis's grandsons. Chilperic fancied himself an intellectual. He tried to reform the alphabet. More dangerously, he issued a circular declaring that the Trinity, the Christian doctrine that God exists as 3 persons in one being, was false. The Trinity was only God, not 3 persons. This was a position, Gregory noted acidly, that no Christian actually held. Chilperic wasn't just wrong. He was claiming authority over doctrine that belonged to the church. He was a king trying to be a theologian, and Gregory would not let it stand. Gregory refused to accept Chilperic's teaching. He cited the church fathers, Hilary and Eusebius, authorities far greater than any king. Chilperic's response was absurd and revealing. He called these long-dead saints his bitterest opponents. Think about that. A king complaining that dead theologians were his enemies. Gregory's warning cut deeper. Watch out, you do not make God or his saints angry. This wasn't empty rhetoric. Gregory was invoking supernatural consequences that kings genuinely feared. Bishops couldn't match royal armies, but they wielded something more powerful, the threat of divine judgment. This confrontation demolishes another misconception that kings held absolute power in the Middle Ages. They didn't. Bishops could and did challenge royal authority. Their weapon wasn't military force, but spiritual legitimacy. A king who defied the church risked not just his soul, but his kingdom's stability. Remember Gregory's framework. The church held society together. A king who attacked that foundation attacked his own power base. Chilperic's theological overreach wasn't just heresy, it was political stupidity. He was undermining the very institution that made his rule possible. Gregory's world is gone. We don't believe bishops hold civilization together, or that violence in defense of faith is automatically justified. But his deeper question remains, what do we think holds society together? Law, economic prosperity, shared values, democratic institutions. Every society has an answer, usually unexamined. And that answer shapes everything else. What we consider good leadership, what threats we take seriously, what decline looks like. Gregory measured kings by their piety and support for the church. We measure leaders differently. But we're still measuring. We still have criteria. We still fear decline. Gregory wrote during what he believed was civilizational collapse. The glory of Clovis had faded. His grandsons schemed and murdered. The disasters amazed and astonished him. Every generation fears it's witnessing decline. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, but the fear itself reveals what people value, what they think is being lost. So for Gregory, it was piety, proper hierarchy, the church's authority. When we fear decline today, what are we afraid of losing? The answer tells us more about ourselves than about whether decline is actually happening. Gregory of Tours offers us a mirror, a strange medieval mirror, but a mirror nonetheless. His world made sense to him. Does ours make sense to us?